My name's Greg. I'm an addict. I'm glad to be here. I'm way up here. God. I don't know if I like that much separation. I spent too long separate. You know, I like us to get together. I think the best talking any of us ever do is sitting on the floor in a living room somewhere. Really. And getting real. Anyway, when I talk, I like to start out by having another moment of silence. So if you will. Thank you, God. You know, sometimes I hear people talk and I hear somebody say something, well, you got to qualify. And I don't know if I really understand what that means or anything like that, but someone called me and told me that it was 3 hours from Louisville, Kentucky to here, and I believed him, so I qualified. Only a dope fiend, huh? I don't know who told me that, but I believe him. I didn't even check it out. But anyway, that's how I got here this weekend. 3 hours from Louisville. No, it's not 3 hours. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. What I hope to do is I hope I bother some of you. I hope I say some things that disturb you. I will probably in the process offend you all once or twice. That's okay. But only by challenging ourselves and our locked in, locked down opinions about how things are supposed to be, do we grow. And one of the things I've learned over my time around NA is that I didn't know nothing about nothing. I had all this information. I had all this education. I had all these street smarts. I had all this stuff that we have, and I didn't know how to live. Now, I had no idea how to use that information, and I had no idea, you know, what this thing called life was all about. And that's what I'm learning. I'm learning how to live. I'm learning about life. I'm learning lessons I should have learned when I was 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13 and so on years old. You know, I'm learning lessons I was supposed to learn when I was too loaded to hear the answers. You know, I'm learning how to be a human being. You know, see, I'm an addict. And, you know, sometimes I've taken great pride in being an addict. I'm an addict, yeah. You know? But I'm also a person. And as much as I hate to admit that sometimes, my humanity is something that's real important to me. And I don't want to forget that. I'm a real person, too. You know, and I'm not separate from the rest of those people out there. You know, those, we call them normies, right? Something like that. We're not that different. You know, I spent a lot of energy proving how different I was than everybody else. I wanted to be different. You know, and then when I was different, I was lonely. I'm not that different. I'm not that different than the guy, you know, as I work with. I'm not that different than the other people on the highway. I'm a person. I'm a real person. And it took me a long time to accept that, because I had so locked into that idea of being different. Anyway, my using is boring. I got started when I was a kid by prescriptions. By the time I was 10 years old, I was taking uppers, downers, and tranquilizers daily, and I was strung out like a dog. I got into high school, I found out there were other drugs, you know. And at 23 years old, I came to Narcotics Anonymous because I couldn't continue to live the way I was living. That's what happened out there. That's what it was like. That's what happened. I missed my teenage years. Monterey Pop Festival. I was there. I don't remember a thing. Too fucked up. You know, too much LSD, too much psilocybin, too much mescaline, and too much STP. I don't remember the music at all. All those great things, right? Guys landing on the moon, right? Giant step for mankind. I nodded out and missed it. That's what it was like. You know, my intimate relations with people. I love you. That's how slick I was, you know. That's what it was like. I never did anything except loaded. You know, I missed all those living experiences and all those fantastic things, you know, because I had my head on my chest or off in orbit somewhere. And that's the story of my using. The last year got me to Narcotics Anonymous. And, you know, what I want to talk about tonight, I don't want to really talk about that, but I'll have to touch on some things because the feelings and the attitudes that happened in that last year or two really started my recovery. I really want to talk about some of the struggles I've had here in recovery, and I want to talk about the steps. I believe in the steps. I believe really, really strongly in the steps. If you don't want to work the steps, you don't have to work the steps. There are plenty of people running around this fellowship to prove that. If you don't want to write an inventory, don't write an inventory. Ain't no skin off my nose. You know, I believe that if you stay clean long enough, you will beg to work the steps, because the pain will get so great that you will no longer continue to be able to stay clean and keep going unless you get some relief. And relief ain't in outside fixes, except temporary. Anyway, the last year of my using, you know, there was a series of events that drove me to Narcotics Anonymous. I'm not going to talk at depth of it. My girlfriend and I gave up a child for adoption, and I hated myself for it. But it forced me to realize the nature of my disease. This was about a year before I cleaned up. I came to the realization that I couldn't promise to be around to help raise that child, that I wanted to be around to help raise. I couldn't promise to be alive in 6 months. Now, I still can't promise that, but the odds are a hell of a lot better today than they were 22 years ago. They're a hell of a lot better today. I couldn't promise to be part of my child's life, and so we gave the child up for adoption, and I hated myself. And what I did what every good dope fiend does. I used, right? And my addiction popped up a notch. Not too long after that, my grandmother died. She was a dope fiend, too. She was one of those dope grandmothers that you avoid, you know, ones that pinch you on the cheek, guilt trip you to death. She died. She took too many Reds one night and slipped and fell and scalded to death in the shower. You know, dope fiend death. You know, and part of me was glad to see her go because she was a pain. And I hated myself for feeling that way. Because a good person wouldn't feel that way, would they? Good person wouldn't be glad to have their grandmother out of their hair. So I must be a horrible person. And my using shot up one more notch. About that time, after my grandmother died, this gal and I that had that baby, well, I don't know what her motivation was, but my motivation was about, well, we'd been together, it looked like we were going to be together. When my grandmother died, there was this house full of furniture, and what the hell? So I asked her to marry me. And part of that was having one last link to sanity. We're still married today. We will celebrate our 23rd wedding anniversary next month. We're going away together for the weekend. We like each other. We got a couple of more kids. We're both monogamous for 23 years. And we like it. Now, I'm not the type. You know, I already identified my name's Greg and I'm an addict, right? And just when I say that, you know that I'm a fuck-up. You know that I'm a fool. You know that I ain't too tightly wrapped. You know I ain't playing with a full deck, right? You know that coming in. You know, this is an NA function. There are certain constant things about all the people at this NA function that don't take a lot of figuring out. You know, we are not here because we were doing real good in the living department. You know, we're all here because we can't do that right. We're not here because we're able to have healthy relationships. None of us has ever been able to do that. We're not here because we're successful at anything. We're here because we're failures at everything. Most of all, failures at being people. Failures at living inside our own skin. You know, we're not here for all those great reasons. So it's uncharacteristic of me. I don't know whether it's more of a miracle to be married 23 years or coming up on 23 years clean. Sometimes I think it's more a miracle to be married 23 years. You know, I can understand staying clean. I can't understand being married. 2 weekends ago in Florida, I did the first relationship workshop I have ever done, the first time I have ever been asked. I know there was a time at some committee meeting, service committee meeting one time, and there were several people with like 15 years plus at that meeting. And there were like 4 people at that meeting that had over 20-year marriages. And none of us had ever been asked to do a relationship workshop. Isn't that bizarre? It's not really that entertaining. You know, we want to hear about the failures. We want to hear about the struggles, and the war stories are great. I know, they're wonderful. But that's not what relationships are about. You know, in the beginning, Lois and I stayed together out of stubbornness. It's true. You know, I came around the program, and one of the things I realized, and we both realized, that we didn't know if we were going to make it together or not. And we decided and made a commitment to give it a try. We'd give it a couple of years to find out, and we were just stubborn enough to go for it. And there had been a lot of guilt and a lot of sickness in the relationship from the gate. And we had to give some of that time to wear off and find out about a new relationship. And today, if I was going to say, why are we still together? If there was one thing more than anything else, is that we respect each other. You know, we respect each other. We treat each other with respect. And I think that's a big key. You know, we're real good friends, as well as being lovers and partners. You know, we like each other. But we got married while I was still out there doing it. And on my wedding day, I was supposed to be the pallbearer at my best friend's funeral. He'd hung himself and left a note that said, "I just can't think anymore." And I knew what he was talking about. You know, I knew about not being able to put those thoughts together anymore. You know, I knew about how you get after you've been sniffing glue for 2 or 3 years. I knew about how you get after you've been taking acid for 2 or 3 years. I knew about how you get after you've been shooting dope for 2 or 3 years. I knew about how you get when you live the way we used to live. And I identified that. You know, I just can't think anymore. I used to pray for the comfort of idiocy. If only I could shut off my head. If only I could shut it down. You know, if only I could stop thinking. You know, I almost got it, and it wasn't comfortable. Almost better living through chemistry, huh? Almost got it. Anyway, I didn't go to his funeral. You know, another friend of mine brought me a bag of dope, and, you know, I got down and stood up, got married, don't remember it. Another part of that same story. There's one event that is really etched in my brain from that time period. And it's an event that I don't ever want to remember any of those, because it's the feelings from those events that brought me here. But the one that really stands out to me is sitting backwards on a toilet like I did so often, sick, couldn't get a vein, blood dripping on the floor, going, God damn, look what's become of me. Look at me. Here I am, strung out like a dog, and what happened to all those dreams? How'd I get here? This isn't right. This isn't the way it was supposed to be. Look what's become of me. And I hated myself. And I felt that tearing desperation that addicts feel. I felt that loneliness beyond any other loneliness I've ever known that addicts feel. And I bet you got a time just like that. Probably different circumstances. Might be the same circumstances. Maybe it was going back to jail one more time. After having planned, I was going to do good this time. It's going to be different. And you get locked down, and the lights go out, after count, and you're going, God damn, here I am again. You know. Or maybe it's turning another trick. Or maybe it's selling bad dope to your friends. Or maybe it's waking up in the morning with a stranger. Or maybe it's going to treatment and have some stranger say, go in that room and take off your clothes. Or maybe it's pissing in a jug. Or maybe it's being fired from a job. Or maybe it's losing a child. Or maybe it's having a friend die in your arms after you sold him some dope. Or maybe, but you got one or you wouldn't be here. Yeah. We all have that one or two or three times when the horror of addiction is very, very real. Don't ever forget those times. I know we try to forget them. And we talk about, yeah, it was good then, Yeah, I did this and I did that. And don't forget the time you sat alone when your heart broke. And you realized that your dreams were dead and your childhood was gone. Don't forget that time because it'll keep you clean. Because there were days when I didn't use because I never ever wanted to be sitting on that toilet like that again. Just like there were days that I stayed clean because I never ever wanted to be shaken so bad I couldn't lay on a bed again. Just like there were days I stayed clean so I never ever had to do the things that I had to do to stay loaded. I was never arrested or hospitalized in the course of my using. I just used every day. But I died inside and I ended up hating myself. And there is nothing worse in the world than hating yourself. And that's where we all come from. Self-hate, self-loathing. And I started looking for help. And I started calling the phone numbers that you hear at 3 a.m. in the morning on the radio shows or on the TV. And I ended up hooking up with Narcotics Anonymous somehow. And I called, and they said, well, I think it was a suicide line or something. I don't know what it was for sure. And they said, are you eligible for Narcotics Anonymous? I said, I don't know. What do you got to be? And they said, we don't know either, but here's this number, We just got it. Maybe you qualify, So I called, and I didn't really think Narcotics Anonymous was for me because, Narcotics Anonymous, that's where drug addicts went, and I'd read about drug addicts, and drug addicts were horrible people. I mean, and I wasn't like the drug addicts I'd read about. I mean, I'd never done an armed robbery. I'd never raped a nun or stolen a little old lady's purse after I beat her up or, gouged holes in my leg with safety pins and poured dope in. And, heck, I cleaned my needles sometimes. I wasn't like a dope fiend, I mean, there was a short period of time when I even used a syringe instead of a dropper. I wasn't a drug addict. I wasn't like those people. I never was in trouble or anything. I just, shooting half an ounce of stuff a day, that's all. I'm not like that. So I was scared, but I called because I was also desperate. And, the man answered the phone, and this is someone who later became my first sponsor, and he said, one of the things he said in that first conversation was, do you have a car? There weren't very many cars in Narcotics Anonymous in those days, and he wanted me to give somebody a ride. Yeah, I had a car. I didn't come here from a place when I had nothing left. I was married. I had an apartment to live in. I had a job. I had a car. My job was where the connection worked so I could get loaded, 2 hours earlier in the day. And I didn't have to wait till 9 o'clock to cop. I could cop at 7 a.m. And, you know, once I did my thing, it didn't matter what I was doing. I could take one piece of metal and stick a screw in it and throw it in a can. You know, I could do that stuff, you know. That's about what I did. Anyway, you know, I was doing all these things. I wasn't like you. And this guy talked me into going to a meeting. This was a Tuesday night that I made my call, and there was a meeting in Hermosa Beach, California. And I was like 24 hours off of a 2.5-year run, and I wasn't going to go into any damn meeting. I wasn't going anywhere that night. But I figured, I counted up, and he said, there's another meeting close to where you live on Thursday. Why don't you go to that? And I promised the guy I'd go to that meeting, and I followed up on that promise, and don't ask me why, but I did. And I went to a meeting on the corner of Yucca and Gower in the basement of a church in Hollywood, California, sometime fairly early in October of 1970. I used twice after that first meeting. I heard something of that first meeting that brought me to a second meeting. I don't remember much, but the only thing I really remember out of that first meeting is someone said you never ever have to use again against your will. And I understood. That had some meaning for me. You see, because there were those times when I didn't want to get loaded, but I had to. There were those times when I didn't want to keep doing the deal, but I had to. There was those times when I didn't have the strength, the courage, the balls left to go out and do it one more time. But I did anyway. And that's really another one of the reasons that, you know, I was looking for help. It's just I couldn't put it together anymore. I couldn't get it up to go out and do it anymore. I was running low on whatever it is that takes us to get up and keep doing it. You know. And I went to the meeting, and I got all dressed up. And I got a box out from under the bed with a suit and a tie, and, you know, all dressed up. I bathed. Well, that was different. You know, yeah. I bathed to go to an NA meeting. Yeah. I was real important for me to have you think that I had my shit together, because I was different. You know, and I went to that meeting, and that was on a Thursday night. On Sunday, I hadn't slept in a week by Sunday. I'd been 6 nights and 7 days without sleeping, and I knew how to sleep. And I went and copped and used and slept. And I came back to Narcotics Anonymous meeting on Monday. And I stood up. Those days, it's kind of bizarre now. I see people doing this sometimes. They'll go out, and then they'll come back in, and they'll go to some obscure meeting 60 miles away from home and pick up a white chip or white key tag again, and then they'll show up back in the meetings as if nothing had happened. And then a few months later, you're talking about, haven't you got a birthday coming up soon? And they're going, no, I had a little trouble about 9 months ago. I had to change my recovery. Well, I remember that. Well, there are only about 20 NA meetings in the world, and when you went out, everyone knew. There was no hiding out in some obscure meeting for 6 months to get back. It's kind of like when people come back today. Sometimes I see us patting them on the head and patting them on the shoulder, saying, "It's all right. It's all right. We love you. It's okay. Just come back every time." It's not all right. If you're back from a relapse, God bless you. I love you. And I will help you any way I can. But don't ask me to co-sign it. So it ain't okay. I hear people say things like, relapse is part of recovery. Bullshit. Relapse has nothing in the world to do with recovery. It has to do with the disease of addiction. It's the antithesis of recovery. It's not about relapse. I hear people talk about the revolving door. You mean the revolving cylinder on the gun playing Russian roulette. Ain't no fucking revolving door. You go use, you violate everything that NA stands for. but we'll love you back. But don't ask me to tell you it's okay. It's not okay. You betrayed me. There was a guy when I came around who's dead now, whose name was Jack Whaley. And he was very important in my early recovery. And when people would go out and come back, he'd stand up in a meeting and embarrass them and tell them, hey, asshole, you don't talk to me for a year because I don't trust you anymore. And if you don't like it, here's a book of matches. Go burn yourself out. You know, and I'm real grateful that everybody wasn't like Jack. But I'm real grateful that Jack was Jack, because somebody had to say it. Because I needed to hear that stuff. I needed to hear it wasn't okay, you know, to fuck around with this thing for years and years and years. You know, recovery takes a commitment. It takes betting your ass on it. It takes going forward with everything you've got, you know, hoping it's enough. Probably believing it ain't enough. You know, today my third step is living life insecure in the belief that there's a loving God that will care for me. It ain't secure in the belief. It's insecure in the belief. And I think that's what it takes to get here. We got to go for it, insecure in the belief that there might be some hope for us. We still got to go for it, even though we don't believe. Anyway, I went to that meeting. I used a second time after that, after I'd had a spiritual awakening, coming back and being embarrassed. I went and found one of my using buddies, and I told him how great this thing, Narcotics Anonymous, was, and you never have to use again. Of course, I had 7 days clean at the time. And I did what we were taught to do. You know, we're taught, bring a newcomer to a meeting, right? Bring him to, I took him to a meeting. I picked him up at the house and brought him to a meeting. It was a Sunday night meeting, October 25th, 1970. And on the way home for the meeting, he was going, this is bullshit, I'm going to get loaded. And I was going, you can't do that, because if you do that, I'll have to go with you and you'll wreck my recovery. And I bought and we used my outfit. That's right. And that was the last time, because I went instantly back in withdrawals. I had trash fever like I had never, ever had it in my life. And I never, ever want to forget that misery. You know, I have never before or since been so sick or so in so much pain. And there's something very, very therapeutic about kicking a habit. You know, there are days that I stayed clean just so I'd never, ever have to do that again either. And a funny thing happened to me on the way back that second time. I had one of those attitude adjustments that they sing about, you know, the 2x4 upside the head type attitude adjustments. You know, and I moved from the back of the room checking you out to the front of the room saying, this is my chair and I'll fight you for it and I don't care if you accept me. I'm here. You're going to have to put me out. Now, you see, I'd come in checking it out, and I'd listen for all the differences, right, like we all do? And someone would say, 15 years in Folsom Prison, and I'd go, whoa, and I'd back up a row, right? Someone would say, quarter-size holes drilled in their heads after the shock treatments, and I'd go, whoa, and I'd back up a row. And someone would be talking long shit about, you know, pulling armed robberies and doing this and doing that, and I'd go, whoa, and I'd back up a row. And I was in the back checking you out by the time I went out that second time, because I was looking for the differences. And I had an attitude. And we had a joke about that earlier in the readings. There is one thing more than anything else that will defeat us in our recovery. This is an attitude. Somebody said using. Sometimes people say drugs. Yeah, that's a given. But before the using and before the drugs is the attitude. There is one thing more than anything else that will defeat us in our recovery. This is an attitude of indifference or intolerance towards spiritual principles. Spiritual principles. An attitude of being unwilling to let go of being a dope fiend. I'm not a dope fiend anymore. I'm a recovering addict. My attitude had to change from an attitude of a dope fiend to an attitude of a recovering addict. As a dope fiend, I had an attitude of indifference or intolerance towards spiritual principles. You know, my attitude was coming in here and finding out what I could get and using you, like I'd always done all my life. Yeah? And that attitude had to change. That was an attitude of indifference or intolerance towards spiritual principles. I came in here wanting to have all the good things that went with getting high, like being able to numb and chill out my feelings, and being able to have social acceptance from a peer group, and being able to talk bad and manipulate people. I wanted all that good stuff, what I thought was good stuff, but I didn't want any of the consequences, like kicking habits and having to do the things I had to do that I hated myself for. You know, I wanted all the benefits of using without the consequences. I wanted absolute freedom and no responsibility, the dope fiend dream. An attitude of indifference or intolerance towards spiritual principles. I wanted the world my way, and fuck you if you got in the way. An attitude of indifference or intolerance towards spiritual principles. I wanted everything I wanted, now and yesterday. I wanted all my desires and wishes to come true, you know, and get out of the way or I'd step on you. An attitude of indifference or intolerance towards spiritual principles. There is one thing more than anything else that will defeat us in our recovery. This is an attitude of indifference or intolerance towards spiritual principles. And I believe in spiritual principles. And I also believe there's a lot more than 27. I got a list at home of 200 and some odd. Not necessarily all principles, but certainly principles, concepts, and sayings that are meaningful to us and in our literature. You know, and that's just out of the white booklet. Nah, not really. But anyway, I got a long, long list of things. And there's stuff, there are principles we don't talk about now, like very often, like tact. Right? Like discrimination. We talk bad about discrimination. You know serenity prayer? The wisdom to know the difference? That's called the principle of discrimination. Being able to tell right from wrong. Being able to tell, you know, the things I can change for the things I can't change. That's discrimination. The principle of discrimination. Tact, you know, it's like we got a little thing, you know, don't go in slippery places, let go of old playgrounds and playmates. That's tact. It ain't tactful to be hanging out in old playgrounds and old playmates, right? And we're setting ourselves up. Reciprocity, that's a good one. One of the buttons in there is one of my favorite things that I think is so important. And, you know, it's what goes around comes around. It's you reap what you sow. It's people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. It's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You know, and so on and so forth. Karma. You know, I don't care what you call it. It's a principle that's expressed in every philosophy and religion that's ever been, as far as I know. You know, and its bottom line is the way you live determines the way you live. How you living? The way you live determines the way you live. If you're out there raising hell, guess what? If you got a life that's based on dishonesty and manipulation and getting away with stuff, guess what? There's going to be a lot of dishonesty and manipulation in your life. If you got a life that's based on hurting people, guess what? There's going to be a lot of pain in your life. You know, and the further you go along a spiritual path, the quicker the payback is, I believe. And that was scary for me because I looked at my life through a fourth step and I found out, whoa, you know what? My life was not a statement about recovery. It was a statement about somebody who was avoiding their feelings. It was a statement about someone who would do anything to be accepted. It was a statement about someone who approached life from an attitude of life sucks. And then you die. Life does not suck. Life's just fine. It's my attitude that sucks. You know, it's kind of like saying, today is a shitty day. Anybody having a shitty day today? All right. Today is not a shitty day. It doesn't have the capacity to be shitty. It just is. You know, it's my attitude. You know, life's a bitch. Life's not a bitch. Life's just fine. You know, my attitude's a bitch. Right? You know, it's me. It's me. It's me. It ain't that. It ain't life. It ain't those outside things. I'm driving down the road and some person cuts me off. You know, and they're not the problem. It's me. The problem is not that they cut me off. The problem is I want to kill them, and I can't think of anything else, and I miss my off-ramp, and I'm late to work because I get obsessed with maiming and mutilating this person that didn't see me when they changed lanes. They're not the problem. I'm the problem. The substance is not the problems. I do not believe that I'm powerless over drugs. I don't believe it. I mean, I've had 55-gallon drums full of toluene and 1,000-gallon tanks full of, chemicals, and they never did anything to harm me. I had a 55-gallon drum full of reagent-grade ethanol, 99.9%. It never hurt me at all. I did things with it. I made coatings, and I worked in the chemical industry for a few years. I made things with that stuff. It was just a substance. It was just a thing, a chemical compound, like any one of thousands of other chemical compounds, and it never hurt me. Now, you put me in that same situation, and I have to order syringes to do laboratory work, and before I wrote the order, I had a box stashed, just in case. My attitude, my addiction. I'm powerless ultimately over me. It ain't that outside stuff. It ain't you. It's like I was talking to somebody about making amends today. And, one of the realities I've learned about amends is they have nothing to do with the other people. Amends are for me. Amends are not about them forgiving me. They're about me forgiving me. It's irrelevant how those other people react when I go up and, and I try to restore the harm that I've done. When I try to make up for the harm that I've done. Their response to that is irrelevant. It's me. It's because I hate Greg, and I got carrying around this load of shit from the past that I can't live with. And I make amends so I can get rid of some of that stuff so I can live. And I can feel good about being Greg. It's not about them. It's not about those outside things. It's about me. And I want to forget that. You see, my answer to life's problems is to find something outside myself to fix me. That's my answer. It's the answer I learned when I was, that tall. And I still fall back on that answer. That's my first line of defense. How can I fix it? Huh? Okay, what can I do? It's not the answer. The answer's in here. It's not that outside stuff. I went through what everybody goes through when we come around the program. I talked about trying to disqualify myself, looking at the differences. And it worked. I used. That last time I used, that Sunday night in October of 1970, was the last time. And I've been clean ever since, and I've been an NA member ever since. And although I have gone to churches, and I have gone to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and I have gone to various other things, I have never ever considered myself part of those things, the way I consider myself a part of Narcotics Anonymous. I've always kind of felt somewhat out of place. I've gotten some good stuff out of going to religious services and things like that, but it wasn't home. It wasn't like an NA meeting. This is where I live, huh? This is where you love me because I'm an addict, not in spite of my addiction. This is where I can touch God. This is where I can see God. I don't see God as well in a church as I do in an NA meeting. I don't see God as well in an AA meeting as I do in an NA meeting. I don't see God as well in the PTA or the Gem and Mineral Society or the Stamp Club or the other organizations that I go to occasionally as I do in NA. This is home for me, and I love it. Maybe if there's something I want to communicate that's special about Narcotics Anonymous, is that this is not something we do for an hour or so every night. It's about a love affair. There's the love affair. There's the excitement and the joy and the spirit and the dynamic living thing that NA is, that we can be part of. This is not something I do in my spare time. NA is alive and vibrant and vital and growing and changing. And when I lose sight of that, I'm in trouble. The NA I came into and surrendered to in 1970 is dead and gone and has been for years. Thank God. It was a very, very, very special thing to me. But you know what? Not very many people stayed clean. There was a special little group of people I looked to. But you know what? I don't see them anymore. A lot of them are gone. You know, the NA I surrendered to no longer exists. The NA today is 100 times better. You know why? Because that's a memory, and today is now. That's a fantasy, and today is real. You know, this is real. You know, this is the best convention there can possibly be. Because all the rest of them are in the past or in the future. And this is now. This is as good as it gets. Feel it. There is nothing better than this right now. Because none of the rest of that stuff is real right now. You know, all that stuff is baggage. One of the things I found out that resentments are also looking back longingly to the good old times. Because that separates me from God just as quick as looking at the bad old times. And dredging up the hate, and dredging up the fear, and dredging up the anger. Dredging up the warm fuzzies and living in those is just as self-destructive. It's just as God-destructive. Separates me from God just as quick. You know, and I have to be aware of that, because I like to think about the good times. Remember when? Wasn't it great? What if? If only. If I'd said this, then she would have done this. You know, remember that? You did, or he. It doesn't make any difference. We all say the same things. You know, we're not that different. You know, those are just as much. 30 days around here was kind of like, this is all right. Feels good. It's like a new drug. Man, and I'm not in trouble, and no one's looking over my back, and no one's after me, and you know what? I'm not sick, and you know. Well, a little sick, but not bad. You know, it's okay, you know. And you know, wow, this is great, man. And I wrote it. I used it. I used NA just like dope. Because it felt good. It felt good not to have to kiss the connection's ass. It felt good not to have to do the things I had to do. It felt good not to wake up sick. It felt good not to have people bitching at me all the time. It felt good not to feel guilty all the time for the way I was living. It felt good. And I wrote it. I wrote it, and I wrote it, and I wrote it, and I wrote it, and in 90 days I had all the answers. I'd memorized the white booklet. And you know, it's funny, you don't see many white booklets anymore, do you? I memorized that thing. Carried one around in my pocket for 2 years. Every time I went to the bathroom, I pulled it out. I memorized it, and I had all the answers. You know, ask me any question. I'd tell you what the little white booklet said. You know, and I talk long shit. Proud. I had no idea what it meant. Had no idea what I was talking about. The funny thing is I did have all the answers. Had all the answers I've ever needed. But I had no idea what they meant. Or even what the questions were. You know. Finding out what the questions were has been interesting. Yeah. A little bit after that 90-day time, sometime around 5 months, there was this thing that happened. It was kind of like the big blue bird of feelings flew over and went, poof. And I'm going, God, I remember this. This is what I used. Some people describe it like a veil lifting. Mine was more like a bird shitting. I'm sorry. I don't identify with a veil lifting. That's not where I come from. You know, all of a sudden I got hit with these feelings that were no longer sedated by the drugs, and I was in trouble because I had no idea of how to deal with them. The only thing I knew to deal with those was to get loaded, and I knew I couldn't do that. And I had nothing left, so I ran around quick. And at 6 months I was going, oh my God, it's not the drugs. Remember? Huh? Because I figured out when I came around, if I just stopped using, everything would be okay. And at 6 months my ass was falling off and everything was not okay, and I couldn't pawn it off on being, using. Couldn't pawn it off on being a dope fiend, because by 6 months I was a recovering addict. Huh? I couldn't pawn it off on the drugs anymore. Now what do I do? And what I did was called substitution. And substitution still plays an important part in my life today. I am fully aware that if you put enough stress on Greg is going to react addictively, one way or another. I will return to my drug of choice or some substitute. Thank God, so far it's been some substitute. And I'm great. I'm a good substituter. I do that well. I do that very destructively. Food's a good one. 80 pounds. 2 years later, I weighed 360 pounds. I found I could medicate those feelings that hit at 4 months with food. And I did it to the best of my ability. Full speed ahead, damn the torpedoes. Like I did everything else, right? Like a dope fiend would. And I gained all that weight, and I hated myself. And over a period of 15 years, I lost most of it. Stopped smoking. Guess what happened? Blew up like a balloon one more time. Stressed out. Reverted to that old thing. Started losing all that stuff and was ripped off for $100,000. Guess what? One more time. Blew up like a balloon. I gave myself permission to eat, knowing what was going to happen. And it's funny. We have a line in the basic text that says insanity is repeating the same mistakes, expecting different results. And I really don't believe that's true. I think that's a good definition of denial. Denial is repeating the same mistakes, expecting different results. Denying the experience, the experience of past, denying the evidence of past experiences. This time it's going to be different. That's denial, right? To me, what I've come up with insanity now along those same terms is insanity is repeating the same mistakes, knowing what the results are going to be and doing it anyway. And that's the nature of my insanity. When I consciously choose the self-destructive path, knowing what the price is going to be, knowing that the price is going to be loneliness and self-hate one more time, knowing that the price is self-violation, and I give myself permission to die one more time, spiritually. That's insane. That's insane. That kicks my ass. And as I came up on a year, I went through what we go through when we come up on a year, Oh my God, if I stay clean 2 more weeks, then I won't be a newcomer more, and I'll have made it, and I won't get any more attention. Oh shit, what do I do now? It's called sabotage, right? Or right after the year when you're going, boy, I'm glad that's over with, now I can get back to living like a real person. Huh? Or let's party. I made it. I've arrived. I'm in cleaning. I got this moon glow. I shine at night when I walk in the dark. Alone. Huh? Yeah, or at 18 months when I'm going, you know what? NA's different these days. No one's having fun anymore. No one goes out to coffee anymore. No one stays and talks anymore. We used to have parties and go over to each other's houses and do things that were fun. This is boring. I don't like this anymore. I go to a meeting, I heard people share 43 times. They all say the same damn thing, and it doesn't make any sense anyway. And all there is in those meetings anyway is disease. Just go in and look for it. Yeah. Attitude. If I go to a meeting looking for disease, I can find it. It's, you can find disease in any meeting. If I go to a meeting and look for negativity, it's there. If I go to a meeting looking for recovery, I can find that too, but I got to look for it. Attitude. If I go to a meeting looking for the presence of God, guess what? It becomes something very, very special. Attitude. But I was bored to tears at 18 months, and guess what? people were still going to coffee and still going bowling and still doing all the things that I enjoyed doing when I came around. Guess who wasn't doing them? I wasn't doing them. All of a sudden, some other things had gotten important in my life, like the television, like ball games, like reading, like my various obsessions. And I wasn't doing the things that made NA fun. If you don't feel like you're part of Narcotics Anonymous, chances are you're not. If you want to feel like a vibrant, happy NA member, do the things that people do that are vibrant, happy NA members. And it ain't an hour and a half a night. It's live this way. It's hang out together. It's do fun things together. It's ask people over, why don't you come over and have dinner? When's the last time you asked someone in the program to come over and have dinner? Break bread together, huh? Well, that's kind of weird. Makes you feel good. Makes you feel like you're part of. When's the last time you called somebody out of the blue and say, hey, let me pick you up to go to the meeting tonight so we can talk on the way? That's kind of weird. When's the last time you went up to someone after me and said, hey, you want to go out to coffee? I know this place down the road where we can get some cappuccino. Good stuff. Huh? Hazelnut. Whatever it is. Go juice. You know. Yeah. When did you die? You know, have you slipped away from doing those things that were fun, that meant something to you? Probably. But it's boring. I don't feel like I'm part of it anymore. You're not. That's true. So act like you're part of. The way you live determines the way you live. Reciprocity again. If you want to feel like a part of, you got to act like a part of. You don't have to believe it. My sponsor talks about this program being like castor oil. You don't have to believe it. If you take enough of that shit, the results are automatic. You do not have to believe it. You know. You don't have to believe that socializing with NA members and doing the fun things that people do, even though they're funny, and you're going to think about, well, you got to do it right so you're cool, you know. God, having to be cool. Remember that? Remember when those folks would come up to you after you'd first cleaned up and offered to get high, and you'd have to go into a 30-minute monologue of, you know, rather than just saying no, because you see, it was so important for them to think that we were still cool. We didn't use drugs anymore, but we were still cool, right? Yeah, I'm still one of the fellas, right? I'm still one of the gang. I'm still all right. I just don't do that anymore. And, you know, I'd talk for a half an hour to convince you, you know, instead of just saying, no, sorry, I can't. You know, remember that? So important. I was so desperate for your acceptance that I never, ever would give you a chance to reject me. I would never, ever let you know what I was really like. I was so desperate for your acceptance that I never, ever gave you a chance to accept me. Because I never believed, I always carried that if you knew what I was like way down deep inside, you'd never accept me. No one with feelings like I had could be okay. And I never let you in. I never was able to be honest. Honesty is something that our program talks about and 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 talks about. Right? And there's more than one kind of honesty. You know, we like to focus on that cash register honesty. Don't lie, cheat, or steal, that one. That's pretty easy. It's getting real with each other that's tough. It's risking each other's rejection that's tough. It's letting you know who I really am. It's letting you know that Greg ain't got his shit together. Letting you know that I have a secret. Way down deep inside of me, there's a little kid who's faking it, who don't know how to live, who's really scared to death, and is vulnerable, who's desperate for your acceptance and your love, and scared to death that he isn't good enough for it. Ooh. Got quiet. That's your big secret too, isn't it? Huh? Yeah, way down deep inside there's a little kid that don't know how to live. That's vulnerable, that can be hurt with just the slightest glance or just the misplaced word. And is lonely. See, I don't want you to know that. So I want you to think I have my shit together. Here it is. Now what I do with it? I want you to think that, having 23 years, I have all the answers. 22 years, 23 in a little while. I want you to think I have all the answers. It's like that moment of silent meditation. I used to come up here, and during that moment of silent meditation, I'd go, I hope they like me, 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 I hope they like me. Right? Now, during that moment of silent meditation, in addition to asking for the presence of God, I go, I hope I'm honest, hope I'm honest, hope I'm honest, hope I'm honest. Yeah, it's like that. I don't have my stuff together. I got about that much more than the bare minimum for me to survive. I don't have any answers. There's some things that have worked for me. Like the basic text says, everything we know is subject to change, particularly when we know about the truth, and things have changed. I believe that it's not quantity that counts, but quality. But I also know from experience that there's some things that it takes years to learn. And you ain't going to get the quality in 90 days. Sorry, there's no way. Looking back on my recovery, I honestly believe it took me 5 years to get any kind of in-depth understanding of the first step. And I don't believe that there's very many people that are any different. My first 5 years were about the first step. At 2.5 years, I was talking about different things that happened. Somewhere around 3 years, a lot of us go through some stuff. All that substitution we hooked into at 60 days, at 6 months, seems like it stops working. And the fancy car is no longer giving us a thrill. And the lover is no longer cutting it for us, is no longer able to function as a drug. And the job, doesn't have the prestige it used to have, And the toys ain't fixing us. And the obsessions have started to hurt worse than help. Huh? And you're going, oh my God, what do I do now? I knew I was sick, but I had no idea. People relapse around 3 years. I believe the answer to that is to dive back into the program on a different level, and I think I began working the steps at that point. I still continued with the substitution whenever I got a chance and whenever it would work, but I found out that that wasn't enough, and I had to have more. And at 5 years, it seemed like the program quit working. And I found myself in a corner, backed up, going, this God shit everybody's talking about, it better be for real or I'm fucked. Because I don't have any more good ideas. Because all those things that I used to use to fix me ain't working. I work with a newcomer and take them to a meeting, dropping off on the way home and gone, they got more together than I do. At least they got hope. I'll call my sponsor and ask her, and let them know I'm hurting and I'm not telling it to the best of my ability, telling the truth. I'll hang up and feel worse. I'll go to a meeting and share wonderfully, and on the way home I'm going, why do I bother? I don't believe that shit anymore. I'll write and get depressed. I'll do all the things that we were taught early to do in our recovery to fix ourselves with Narcotics Anonymous. And they quit working around 5 years. And I see that happen to people between 4 and 6 years. And not only do I see relapses, but I see suicides. Classically, as I was sitting there with a shotgun at my mouth, and I had to make a choice. Huh? I had to make a choice. And I've lost friends behind the 5-year crisis. The answer is we have to turn our recovery over to the care of God. Because we can't fix ourselves even with NA. And I believe that for me, the beginning of spirituality was around 4.5 to 5 years. And I came out of that with a new relationship with God. And ever since that crisis for me, there's been a little place way down deep inside where I knew that everything was going to be okay. And I could touch that and feel that place. And I didn't have to have the kind of fear that I had going into that. And I didn't have to have the type of insanity that I was going into, because I began the process of being restored to sanity. I look at the second step very different today than I used to look at it. I went down the same path most of us go through with the second step. You know, came to believe the power, got that. What's next? Rubber stamp, right? I skipped over that step at first. You know, then I came back and I started thinking about how important that was with several years clean. And I said, okay, came to believe the power greater than ourselves, okay, power greater than power. That must be this higher power stuff I hear people talking about. Do you know it doesn't say higher power anywhere in the steps? I wonder where that came from. Sometimes I wonder where that phrase, higher power, came from. It's kind of bizarre, isn't it? Yeah. Well, it doesn't say it in the steps. Higher power, okay, but it must be that higher power stuff. Okay, came to believe the higher power could restore us to sanity. Yeah, all right. Yeah, higher power, that must be God, right? Yeah. I came to believe that God could restore me to sanity. Sanity. What's this sanity stuff, you know? Really, the most craziest thing I've ever done is use drugs, so maybe I come to believe that God can fix my addiction. Okay. And that was my second step for a while. Guess what? That's not what the second step says. You know, if anything, I think that we misplace God in the second step. I think God has more to do with sanity than it has to do with power greater than ourselves. That may sound weird, but today when I read the second step, to me it means that I believe that this process, this spiritual process of power greater than I am, can restore my relationship with God, restore my relationship with reality, can restore my spirituality. And that promise is validated in the 12th step, where it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. You know, today, the second step to me means that if I live this way, I can get closer to God. I can start living in harmony with reality instead of in contradiction with reality. I can stop living a life that is like the fingernails on a blackboard and start living a life that is like a quiet breeze, a breath of fresh air. That's what the promise of the second step is to me. And I firmly believe that the 12 steps are a path to God. That the 12 steps, and this is going to sound bizarre, but the 12 steps are just as viable a road to enlightenment as any religion has ever been. And I am committed to that idea. I am committed to the point where I will live my life based on the proposition, insecure in the knowledge, that there's a loving God that will care for me. An example of that I talked with somebody about earlier, my family and I were homeless 2 years ago. After we got ripped off for a dream and some money, and nothing was happening, we decided that we needed to change. We were tired of Atlanta. We didn't think there was anything magic about the place. But we decided we needed to change, and we put all our stuff in storage and took the kids and the dog and the cat, put them in the minivan, and took off, knowing that everything was going to be okay, but terrified periodically, but knowing that everything was going to be okay. And that was the third step. And somehow I ended up in East Tennessee, jobless. I moved to East Tennessee to take this really fancy job, and it didn't even last 90 days before they shut the facility down. And then I scraped with the odd jobs for over a year. Today, I'm doing something bizarre. I mean, I never, ever in my wildest dreams thought I'd be working. I'm working for the Tennessee Department of Corrections. That's not something wrong about it. I mean, that's really weird. I'm working with the juveniles. Tennessee has made a decision that, you know, that they think the best way they can decrease the overpopulation in the jails is by, you know, trying to keep the juveniles from going on into the adult system. And they're trying to treat them rather than house them. And it's bizarre. It's really weird. And it's kind of neat to be a part of that, but I never ever thought I'd end up working in corrections. I'll tell you that. That's strange, isn't it? But here I am. You know, way back when, one of the things that's the reality of my using days was I never got busted. For whatever reason, I don't understand. I used to say someday there will be a chance for me to carry the message where I wouldn't have a chance to carry it if I had a prison record. And this may be it. I don't know. I don't know why I was never busted. I deserve to be. I set myself up to be many times. I don't know. Maybe this is it. Who knows? All I know is that my God gives me everything I need, you know, right on time. Never ever gives me more than I can handle. Does not have any tests for me. Does not have any trials for me. My God is like the wind. You know, an ever-loving, ever-caring, ever-positive force that I can grab if I have the courage, or that I can hide from, like I always have. And it's up to me. It ain't up to God. God's there. It's up to me. Attitude. 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 Some more of the awarenesses I've had about the steps in the last year or so, there's been an awareness about the relationship of the 6th and 7th step to the rest of the steps, about this restoration of sanity, about sanity being in touch with reality, right? Being in touch with God, being in touch with spiritual principles. I believe that my defects are those things about me that separate me from God. And my shortcomings are the way those things that separate me from God show up in my day-to-day living. And I believe God's got a great answer to my 7th step petition. There are 3 petitions we make in the course of the steps. The first one is in the 3rd step, where we make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. We're petitioning for God's care. We're asking God to take care of us. We're living, hoping that God will care for us. The second one is in the 7th step, and it's humbly asking Him to remove our shortcomings. We're petitioning God to take away those parts of ourselves that separate us from Him or her or it, whatever you want to, you know. The God I believe in has no sex. You know, it's not sexless. It is all things. It's all sexes. It's male and female. You know, but I make a petition in the 7th step to be restored, to be removed of my shortcomings. And I make a petition in the 11th step for knowledge and power. Knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry it out. Direction. So I pray for care. I pray for restoration, healing, and I pray for direction, knowledge, and power. 3 petitions we make. God's got an answer to that one where I'm asking to be fixed. God says, no sweat, I got you covered. Here's what I want you to do. You know all that shit you're carrying around from your past? We're going to take care of it. Make a list of all the people you've harmed. Become willing to make amends to them all. And make those direct amends to them whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. You don't have the right to fix your feelings at the expense of someone else. And the 8th step's about me. It ain't about them. It's about self-forgiveness. It's about me being okay with me. I said it before, it has nothing to do with those other people. And through that, God takes care of the stuff in my past that separates me, that limits my spiritual growth, that prevents me from being more spiritual. And then God says, no sweat, I got you covered in the present. Here's what I want you to do. Continue to take personal inventory, and when you're wrong, promptly admit it. Start monitoring your life. Start being aware of yourself. Stop doing the things, you know, that set yourself up for self-hate, self-loathing, that violate spiritual principles, that separate yourself from me. You know, stop doing those things. Learn from your experience. When you're wrong, you know, admit it. Find some balance in your life. Balance is what happens when you work the 10th step. Did you know that? And I used to have this weird thing about balance. I thought balance was like a picture, right? Like a snapshot, with everything in its place, and everything in perfect symmetry, and this part equaling this part equaling this part, laid out just perfect, artistically, right? And then I've come to realize, you ever balanced a broom on your hand? How still can you hold it? You can't. It's always moving, isn't it? Or the guy on the high wire. You can see him up here, walking the length, and he's got this long pole. He's walking, and it's moving, and he's adjusting all the time. Balance is not static. It's continual adjustment to the forces at play in your life using spiritual principles. And we find it by continuing to take personal inventory, and when we're wrong, promptly admit it. And when we're wrong, readjust. It's a continual adjusting to life based on spiritual principles. That's what balance is. It ain't about a picture, static and still and locked in and dead. It's about living. And if I take care of those things, I don't build up a lot of stuff in the present, to separate me from God. And God goes on to say, there's no sweat, I got you covered in the future too. Seek through prayer and meditation to improve your conscious contact with me. Praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. If I can let go of my desires as the basis of my decisions and my actions, my wants, and embrace spiritual direction rather than selfish direction, or in love. In the process of doing that, we get to shine. We get that inner feeling, that inner fire, that inner glow, that inner light. In the process of doing that, we get the greatest joy. We get to touch each other's souls. We get to meet face to face and heart to heart and spirit to spirit and soul to soul in anonymity. And touch. And contribute to each other. And give each other and love each other in ways we never knew were possible. And it feels good. Remember those feelings when you've talked to somebody and they were new, man, and everything disappeared, and sex disappeared, and clean time disappeared, and job disappeared, and it was just you and them, and you were really, really together, and you experienced this thing we call empathy. Ain't nothing better than that. That's better than dope. Yeah. Better than sex. Better than a pee when you really got to go. And that's better than sex. Huh. If you could only choose one or the other, which would you do? I mean, really. We take all this stuff so seriously, right? I will talk briefly about relationships. We don't do that well. We are invariably attracted to absolutely the worst possible people for us. We seek out those people that will confirm our low self-esteem. We chase relationships that will end up with our being able to say, see, I told you no one will ever love me, and I don't deserve a healthy relationship. We're great at that. We're great at that because we don't know what the rules are, and we don't know what our morals are. The fourth step says we made a searching and fearless moral inventory. One of the things I've had to cop to is my first 4 steps had nothing to do with a searching and fearless moral inventory. They had to do with an assessment of the unmanageability of my life. And they were written first steps. They were not really fourth steps. They had nothing to do with my morality. They had to do more with show and tell. And boy, I got a lot of relief out of them, and they were really good, but they weren't fourth steps. They were first steps. They were me getting rid of the garbage of my past and my secrets. But they weren't about learning about my morals. Anyway, we come in here and we get a change of attitude. And it's a love affair. It never ever was okay for me to be Greg. It wasn't okay. Wasn't okay to feel the way I feel. Wasn't okay to be who I was. Today, I'm glad to be Greg. And it's okay to be 46 years old and fat, gray. And they're going to take the rest of my teeth in the next 2 weeks. And it's okay. Because I got something inside that I never had before. Yeah. And I got a feeling, and I got an attitude, and I got a spirit, and I got a love affair, and I got hope. And I have experience, even though I go, yeah, but. You know. I got 22 years that say 100% of the time, if I let go of control, everything turns out okay. I got 22 years that say every time I trust my higher power, things that turn out wonderful and I come up smelling like a rose. But every time I'm faced with that decision, I go, yeah, but. And today, I have a gift beyond anything that I can even, it just blows me away. Blows me away. I can't even conceive of it. And we all have that gift given to us. Today our lives mean something. It makes a difference that Greg has lived. And it makes a difference that you have lived. Believe it or not. Because chances are, if you're here, you've touched someone in the process of staying here. And contributed to their life. And their life and their survival gives meaning to your life and your survival. People have strove to give meaning to their life for centuries. People have given their lives so their lives had meant something. And we can do it just by living this way. Think about that. Think about the miracle, the awesome miracle, that it makes a difference that you're alive. That your life has a positive meaning, that you have contributed something to this reality. Oh, man. You're worth something. You've made a difference in someone's life. And God will continue to give you opportunities to make a difference in people's lives. If we can get our selfishness out of the way, we can make that miracle more miraculous. You know, and it's about living. It's about spiritual principles. It's about getting closer to God. It's about loving one another. It's about treating each other as if we were all manifestations of God. It's about worshiping each other and treating each other with great care. It's not about abusing each other. It's not about dope fiending each other. It's not even about addiction. You know, addiction is the key that has unlocked my spirit. My disease is the best thing that ever happened to me. You know, because in bringing me to my knees, it demanded that I find something to believe in. In bringing me close to death, it demanded that I embrace life. In bringing me to self-hate, it demanded that I forgive and begin to love myself. And when I did that, I got you. We need to take real good care of each other. We need to stop abusing each other. We need to start loving each other. You know, we need to start treating each other as if we were all manifestations of God. And if we can do that, everything's going to be all right. And we will all know the magic and feel the miracle. Thank you.